You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about a movie that doesn't exist, but it could have existed. That's right, we're talking about could have been a Carpenter. Specifically, we're talking about John Carpenter's Creature from the Black Lagoon. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me today, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau. Pete, I think we love John Carpenter.
I don't know if it's reciprocated because I don't know that John Carpenter knows who the hell we are. But yes, I think it's fair to say at this point that we have love for John Carpenter.
Yep, we have affinity for his films. So, Mr. Carpenter, no threats. We're not going to be stalking you anytime soon.
Your unrequited love is something that we will just have to learn to live with, Mr. Carpenter.
Let me tell you a little something about love, Dennis. It has voracious appetite. It eats everything. Friendship, family. It kills me how much it eats. But I'll tell you something else. You feed it right, and it can be a beautiful thing, and that's what we have. You know, when someone believes in you, man, you can do anything, any fucking thing in the entire universe. And when you believe right back in that someone, then watch out, world, because nobody can stop you. Then nobody, ever. And you feel this way about Lee? What? Fuck no. I'm talking about Christine, man. No shitter ever came between me and Christine. Now you watch this.
That's right. And talk about, man, you'd think we would plan these transitions because we're going to talk about unrequited love because John Carpenter was slated to make a movie that's kind of addressing that theme, a little bit of Beauty and the Beast in what would have been John Carpenter's Creature from the Black Lagoon. This movie was not made, but we're going to talk about what would have been, what could have been a Carpenter, what could have been Carpenter's Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I'm just going to set up a little bit of the creature, Pete, if you don't mind here.
I don't mind.
Science hunts Amazon gillman in the most astounding expedition of our time.
This is exactly as it was 150 million years ago when it was part of the Devonian era.
As man continues his conquest of the unknown, daring underwater adventurers challenge the world's most treacherous waters to find the only living link with the beginning of time. Creature from the Black Lagoon, rising from the monstrous depths to astound and terrorize the world. No. Feel the frightening fury of a man-beast, aroused to strange emotions by its first sight of a woman. See underwater thrills never filmed before, amazing underwater battles never dreamed of before. Creature from the Black Lagoon.
The original Creature from the Black Lagoon comes out in 1954. Sci-fi horror, focuses on a prehistoric amphibious creature discovered in the Amazon River. Group of scientists embark on this expedition, try to capture this mysterious, gillman. It turns out the gillman is infatuated with the female lead, Kay Lawrence, directed by Jack Arnold at the time, who had made It Came From Outer Space, The Incredible Shrinking Man, Monster on Campus, Tarantula, a lot of movies that I've seen thanks to Svengoolie, but a lot of those atomic age 50s sci-fi era flicks.
This week on Svengoolie, mutants, spiders, and freaks.
Freaks of any kind give me the willies.
Okay, just spiders then.
I'll have to see that tarantula before I believe it.
It's Tarantula on the next Svengoolie, Saturday at 8, 7 Central on MeTV.
The original Creature from the Black Lagoon covered a lot of themes. Man and nature, man versus nature, the whole man interacting with like lost civilizations, cryptids, plus you have that whole Beauty and the Beast theme going on as well. Introduced us to the Gillman, creature designed by the often not credited and very much forgotten Millicent Patrick. Again, does not get enough credit for her amazing, iconic design work on the Gillman.
I mean, what a cool design.
It is, and it was designed by a woman, Millicent Patrick, who...
She nailed it.
She did, but she didn't get a lot of... Bud Westmore's regime got the credit for it. But when the movie came out...
Look at that.
Yeah. when some publicists found out that a woman designed it, they did a whole kind of Beauty and the Beast campaign, and apparently Bud Westmore was furious. He goes, "It's my work." It's
Oh no!
And he was famous for posing with other people's stuff. A very fine sculptor named Chris Mueller sculpted the creature's head, anyways, and I think he did the abdomen and some of the parts, and he also sculpted the Metalonian mutant from This Island Earth. The big brain.
Oh, okay.
Thing,
Yeah.
And the Gillman is part of that Universal Monsters pantheon. He's in the group picture with Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Bride, the Wolfman. But turns out those films, Dracula 31, Frankenstein, same year, Mummy 32, Wolfman is in 41, Creature doesn't come out till 54. So much later. So kind of at the tail end of what we would probably call that Universal classic era with the Universal Monsters. They end up making some sequels. Revenge of the Creature in 55, Creature Walks Among Us in 56, and then the Gillman also made his appearance with just about every other Universal monster in those Bud Abbott, Lou Costello meets movies. So 54, they met the Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, here are Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, everyone.
He was in Mad Monster Party, which is kind of like a fun stop-motion animation, Boris Karloff short that came out in 67. And although it's not the official Gillman, Wolfman had nards, and in Monster Squad, the Gillman, he took a shotgun to the chest. That was in 87. So it didn't work out for him very much. Kind of like an unceremonious death for the quote-unquote Creature in that movie. So that's the origin of the Creature. So 1982 comes around. John Landis, before Twilight Zone, the movie, and if you're not sure about what that reference is, go check out the internet. Be prepared. There are YouTube videos. They will scare the living shit out of you. So John Landis wants to do a remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon with the original director, Jack Arnold. Jack Arnold wasn't in best of health, but he was directing episodes of shows like Love Boat. So I know where young Pete Charbonneau was. He was watching Jack Arnold directed episodes of Love Boat during those summers when they were in reruns.
Love, exciting and new.
But since maybe Jack Arnold wasn't going to be able to direct, Joe Dante was considered to direct this John Landis penned remake of the Black Lagoon. And if you think of Joe Dante, Piranha, Gremlins would have made sense in kind of like that 80s version of what maybe Creature would have been. So was director Mike Fino, who was behind Matinee, Inner Space, Explorers, and The Burbs, could have brought those 80s sensibilities to a version of the Creature at the time. And the reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it, reimagining, had a script written by Nigel Neal, who was the man behind the Quatermass series and also brought us the script to Halloween 3, that wasn't the biggest fan of John Carpenter, as we find out later. The original script for this Landis version had two creatures. So basically you had like the one calm creature and the one destructive creature. And they were both being pursued by the government, obviously to be captured, to be experimented on. Landis at the time, and Pete, maybe we should talk about this more, maybe even do a book about it, because he wanted to do it in 3D because of the 80s trend.
There you go. I'm curious if you know this or not, but John Landis, being a director in his own right, did he not want directorial responsibilities over this? He just wanted to kind of handle the script?
He just finished the year before in 81, American Werewolf in London. So I had the same thought, Pete, when I thought that. I'm like, maybe at the point he wanted to hand this off to someone else. Maybe he had a respect for the Creature and he didn't want to mess it up. So why not go back to the man who brought us the Creature and Jack Arnold? So I'm not sure, but Pete, we had the same mind because I'm like, John, why didn't you just direct this? It didn't work out for Landis. We never saw that movie. John Landis pushed for it in 3D. Universal that had just released Jaws 3D, again, a movie we've talked about, Pete. So after they see the lack of a success of Jaws 3D that Earl Owensby, the great Earl Owensby, said was probably the downfall of 80s 3D films, says, yeah, sorry, we're not making the Creature in 3D. We're not making it at all with you, Landis. 1992, enter John Carpenter. Universal brings in Carpenter. They're excited to work with him. He just finished directing the comedy thriller Memoirs on an Invisible Man. And I think you've mentioned before, Pete, you have not seen this one.
I have not, no.
Stars Chevy Chase, Daryl Hannah. He's working with a larger than normal budget, $40 million. And Universal's like, hey, you've got star power. You're working with some celebrities. You've got some money. Ivan Reitman and Richard Donner, they walked away from the project. So Chevy Chase was really pushing as using his star power as leverage to bring on Carpenter. So Universal did. And that did not work out very well because this summer tentpole movie, expensive movie, was a flop. It did not do well. For comparison, as I was looking at this, the budget for Memoirs was 10 times higher than the budget he had for They Live. And at that point, been a few years since he had directed, because now we're still in 92. So there's at least 4 years there where Carpenter hasn't directed. And here he jumps into this movie that's 10 times more expensive than the last thing he did. Nevertheless, Universal's excited. Their studio head, Tom Pollock, I guess, told Carpenter, and this is from a Starlog interview back in 92, Tom Pollock says to Carpenter, look through our library of pictures, see if there's anything you want to make. And Carpenter says, first thought that came into his mind was Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Where did your love of films and filmmaking begin?
In movie theaters when I was a little kid. My mom was a big movie fanatic and took me to everything. And the little town I grew up in, there were 2 downtown theaters and there were 2 drive-ins. And I just went all the time. That's where I fell in love with cinema. My big love was Westerns, first of all, but science fiction and horror movies. The 50s is a golden age for science fiction movies and monster movies, which I loved dearly.
Now let's get into what Carpenter's Creature from the Black Lagoon would have looked like. From his retelling, his version would have been pyramids in the Amazon, Lovecraft, cryptozoology. He wanted to tackle themes of creationism. So Carpenter says, again, back in 92 in Starlog, several possible aspects to the storyline. One of them involves the creature being the missing link between man and fish. Would be interesting to combine that with creationist scientists who are trying to prove that man walked with dinosaurs 10,000 years ago. They try to prove the literal biblical origin of life in total contradiction of scientific fact. And then Carpenter said, Nigel Neal wrote a very interesting script, but it was written for 3D. It was also written 10 years ago. Things have changed. We want to start from the beginning. We're going to use aspects of Nigel Neal's work. He had some pretty neat scenes, but we're going to redo them. So he brings in, as he frequently does, a collaborator, Bill Phillips, who worked with him on Christine, and it would have been John Carpenter's Firestarter. Also did not work out. And 2 drafts of the script were made. You can find them online. I'm going to credit the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. They do a really good breakdown beat by beat of unmade scripts. And they found both scripts, and over one of their episodes, I was able to listen to them kind of go through it and got a really good sense for what John Carpenter's Creature from the Black Lagoon would have been. And it's exactly what you think. It's essentially kind of like a retelling, another version of the original. So it doesn't depart much, except for obviously some more violence because it's 1992 and special effects, and they can get away with a little bit more. As far as what John Carpenter wanted to do visually with the iconic Gilman, he brought in Rick Baker to do the special effects. The concept designs, you can find them online. It's kind of neat to see. He looks more menacing than he did in the original, and this is giving Millicent Patrick and the original crew a lot of credit because he looks pretty badass and menacing back then in the 50s. Looks great in what would have been this Rick Baker special effects version of John Carpenter's Creature from the Black Lagoon. So then Carpenter said, I didn't want him to be unrecognizable. I want the Creature from the Black Lagoon. However, I think he could look less rubbery. His claws have to bounce the way they did in the original. But essentially, if it's not broken, why fix it? And then Baker said, we actually did a whole bunch of designs and maquettes. My designs for the creature were kind of like designs for the Wolfman, very much based on a love for the original material, trying to stay true to that in a lot of ways. I think we had a creature that was updated, but you could still tell where it came from.
And we've talked about before on some of the almost Carpenter films, stuff that he was attached to that didn't happen. You mentioned a couple like Firestarter here. This was always the one to me that I was most excited to think about what it could have looked like had it come to fruition. I love the original, and this is where I think it ties in nicely with Carpenter's. I love like the isolationist part of it for much of that movie, where they're just kind of, in that lagoon location. They're kind of trapped because of the fallen log or whatever is like blocking their exit, so they're kind of stuck there. So that obviously harkens back to something like The Thing, where they're all kind of in one location. there's just so much there that I think in John Carpenter's hands is just fertile ground to kind of update, kind of what he did with The Thing, where he really made that into his own, taking an established film that was not just well regarded, but is considered a classic of its age, and just really putting his own stamp on it. I would love to have seen if he could have done the same thing with Creature of the Black Lagoon, because it's not a perfect movie, the original, but it is so good that I feel like that could live on its own, and then Carpenter's version could also have lived on its own. It's interesting to know that this was, I think, 92 that you said that was when he was getting attached to it.
From what I read, it was around 91, 92. So you figure, after maybe a year or so in pre-production, this probably would have come out around like 93, 94.
Yeah. Okay. It's because my initial thought was, if this was earlier in the 80s, would he have shied away from it? Because while he was established pretty early on as, an in-demand and quality director, having already done something similar with The Thing.
That's right.
Would he have worried about getting pigeonholed as being, oh, this is a guy that can kind of just remake some old classics? Not that was going to be his sole claim to fame, but if you stack a couple of those up early in your career, it's that's one of those things that could then be difficult to shake later on, because that's going to be what you're known for. But I think it being the early 90s and him having more films under his belt, that expanse of time, I think would have made it completely acceptable, and I could see him being excited about being attached to a project like that and tackling a classic. I have seen the Rick Baker concept designs of the creature. Looks awesome. Again, especially for that time period, early 90s. You're getting one of the best to ever do it with Rick Baker doing the creature effects work. So any thoughts of it being dated or maybe looking a little hokey go right out the window because of what that guy can do.
I do vividly remember going to the drive-in with my parents. I was a little kid in my pajamas in the back seat. And we went to see, there was a re-release of King Kong when Godzilla came out. They were like in a double bill at my local drive-in. And my dad was a science fiction and fantasy horror film buff, so he told me about all these films, and I was excited to see them. And the double bill started out with Godzilla, and I kind of fell asleep partway through Godzilla, I think, because it was past my bedtime. So Godzilla was actually the one I remember seeing, and I thought it was King Kong. So, it was like on a Saturday night, and my parents were sleeping in on Sunday morning, and I decided I was going to make a King Kong costume. I actually got out some cardboard and, a paper bag, and I cut out some of those, Godzilla fins for my back, and made this kind of paper bag mask. And, when my parents finally got up, I went, look what I made. I made King Kong, and I was like, well, no, actually you made Godzilla. You didn't make it through King Kong.
When we were talking about discussing this, my mind has constantly been rolling around with like, man, I wonder what this would have looked like if it came to fruition. Kind of bummed that it never did.
And you figure, like you said, The Thing was part of that 80s, 90s remakes of those 50s sci-fi atomic age films, because you had the remakes of The Blob, The Fly, The Thing, obviously Cat People. So it would have fallen in line with remakes that would have been presented for a modern audience, given his very specific storytelling lens with Rick Baker. I mean, just like The Thing, you think about like Rob Bottin and what he was able to contribute masterfully to that remake. I wonder if Carpenter would have been able to kind of pull the magic trick twice, right? Like kind of like, can he do the magic again? I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he would have. Again, hearing the script kind of told beat by beat, it had a lot of the DNA of the original, but I think this is where, with any could have been a Carpenter, any could have been any movie, I think there's a big valley between what you see on the script, what ends up getting shot, and what ends up getting edited, and what ends up on screen.
Do you like the editing process?
I do very much. It's a rewriting process. Basically, you've shot one movie, and if you want to make it work differently, you can. You can rewrite a film by the editing.
Are you there for every frame for the edit, or you
Yes.
go in and have somebody else do a rough cut, and then you come in and...
Well, I don't literally cut it myself.
No, I know that, but you know what I mean. Obviously,
yes,
I understand that. But some people just have an editor who they've long known and trusted put together.
No, never. No, they're my films. They got my name above the title. I better be in on it.
Well, it's interesting about you when you say that. You're one of those directors whose name does go above the title because you have a name brand.
Well, one thing they taught me in film school was no matter what, if you're a gun for hire or you write the screenplay yourself, no matter what, make it your own film. Make it personal. Bring something to it. One of my teachers at film school was Orson Welles, and he said, look, sometimes I do scripts because there's a great chase in the 10th reel, and I can do something with that chase. He said, I just don't do it for necessarily the whole movie, but when I do it, it's all mine.
That movie that there were 2 drafts of would have probably looked very different if they were actually in the box office, but considering Carpenter's track record, maybe at that point, when you're thinking about, movies like Village of the Damned or stuff that he would have been made later, like Ghost of Mars, that are a little bit more forgettable, even, hate to say like Escape from LA. Mm-hmm. I would have liked to think this would not have been in that part of his catalog.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think everyone's mileage on some of the latter day Carpenter films can kind of vary. Some of them have their fans. I know you and Josh and maybe Nick are big fans of In the Mouth of Madness, which came after this time period. So you got him coming off of They Live, which he was very much invested in. Seems like his passion for making films was, as you go through the 90s, was maybe starting to wane a bit, having kind of been burnt so many times, either through the studio system or just not getting the financial reception that he felt like, he deserves, and more the acclaim that he's getting now that didn't happen at the time and just did not translate into, monetary success, which he is more than willing to remind everyone
That's
these
right.
days. So I feel like this was coming in at that point where he probably still had enough of that passion that he could have brought to this. And again, I think depending on how much leeway he could have gotten in terms of the script and casting and bringing in his team, I think we could have gotten something really special. But obviously, we'll never know. We can only kind of just, play fantasy Carpenter on this one. But I believe that there was a great movie in there still waiting to be made at this time in his career.
Yep.
And that Creature from the Black Lagoon could have been it.
You were talking about In the Mouth of Madness, so he ends up working with Sam Neill again, who he had worked with on Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and then makes In the Mouth of Madness in 94, hearing how he wanted to bring in Lovecraftian elements to his version of Creature from the Black Lagoon. Well, kind of gets to scratch that itch too, right? In Mouth of Madness, which certainly has a lot of those.
Kane's writing has been known to have an effect on his readers.
The book drove people insane.
This is not reality!
Now the movie is coming. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. Rated R.
So we didn't see his version. It seems like Universal has not let Creature from the Black Lagoon lie for very long, because in 95 I saw Peter Jackson was considered to remake, but when that didn't pan out, he went and redid King Kong. After the success of 99's The Mummy, with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, that was brought up again. Nothing panned out. They did consider Gary Ross, who was director of Hunger Games and Seabiscuit and Big, director Breck Eisner, who directed the remake of Romero's The Crazies, the 2010 remake, which is a pretty solid film.
That's solid, yeah. Yep, very solid.
He also directed Sahara and Last Witch Hunter. I would like to think, although I have not read it, so I cannot confirm, that Gilman would have been a part of the whole Dark Universe thing that Universal had planned when they started off with, I think it was 2017's Tom Cruise starring The Mummy. I think Russell Crowe was like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Johnny Depp, I think, was the Invisible Man.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if in the group picture, Javier Bardem may have been the Wolfman. I think
that sounds right. Maybe. Maybe.
But
I've wiped that from my memory pretty quickly. Most of the planet has.
Yeah. And I think even Angelina Jolie may have been the bride. They were going for big name talent. But I can't, again, someone's listening to this and saying, oh, and Christian Bale was supposed to be the Gill Man. I'm like, sure, if maybe that was the plan all along. I don't know. I'm sure they wanted to make some money off the legacy of the creature and do something, because again, didn't work out with Carpenter, didn't work out with any of those directors. In 2002, they reached out to Guillermo del Toro, and we kind of know how this story ends, and he wanted to do the version where it focuses more on the Gillman, his POV, leaning into the female lead relationship. He wanted to make it a Victorian era period movie. Studio wouldn't move forward with any of that, so he makes his own version in 2017, the same year that The Mummy starring Tom Cruise comes out. Talk about a little kismet there. The Shape of Water, and that wins an Oscar for Best Picture. And maybe to give John Carpenter the last word on this could have been a Carpenter of that could have been Carpenter's Creature from the Black Lagoon and The Shape of Water, John Carpenter said, well, the thing about Guillermo was that he did a movie about a girl fucking a fish. We weren't going to do that. So there was no Oscar in our future. You just have to have this girl fuck a fish in order to win the Oscars. John Carpenter, ladies and gentlemen.
I feel like that's a great place to end it. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So, if Carpenter had done Creature from the Black Lagoon, what do you think he would have named the boat that they journey to the Black Lagoon on, which in the original is called the Rita?
We had the opportunity to drive through Kentucky, and we saw how he took street names that he grew up with and put them in movies like Halloween in the Fog. There's a part of me that thinks maybe he would have introduced some of that in there, but considering the fact that he wanted to throw in Lovecraft elements, and this is where we need Nick and Michelle of the Lovecast podcast to come in and maybe help us. Maybe you think a nod to something Lovecraftian?
Yeah, possibly. I'm thinking also like he was certainly willing to reuse names of his collaborators in films. So you've got Tom Atkins as Nick Castle in The Fog. So does he bring back a nod? Like, do you call it the Elizabeth Dane?
Yeah.
Or the Annie?
Maybe the Dickie Warlock?
That's the dinghy. That's the dinghy. The dinghy Warlock.
That's right. That's right.
That's the boat towing behind that the creature ends up just. There's a picture at the end of like the boat like leaving the lagoon, like we're free, and the dinghy and the creature's just kind of sitting there like scrubbing his back with a brush, like heading off to civilization for the sequel. And the stuntman would have been Dick Warlock as well, just to close that loop for sure. Dick Warlock or Christian Bale, who lost 175 pounds to fit into the Gillman suit. Yes. And at that time, then poor Doug Jones would be at home being, how much weight do you have to lose in order to get in a rubber suit, guys? Come on. I've been eating peas for 6 months straight. What are you doing to me? One lost or one missed opportunity would be if they had made this in the 80s, hiring TV's Buck Rogers, Gil Gerard as the Gill Man. Little Gil on Gil action. Little Gil as Gil. Gil on Gil. Nice. As long as we get Aaron Gray in there somewhere, I would have prepubescent Bernie would have been very happy. Aaron Gray playing the Julia Adams part. There you go. That's right. There you go.